Welcome to ISN Live. Our topic today is worker justice and the minimum wage. As you may know, on May 25th, members of both the U.S. House and Senate introduced legislation to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour by 2024. In the Senate, this effort is being led by Senators Bernie Sanders and Pat Murray. 30 senators have already signaled support for the bill. Representatives Bobby Scott and Keith Ellison introduced the House version of the bill, and over 170 members of the House of Representatives have already co-sponsored this bill. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Congress has not passed an increase since 2007. Our speakers today are panelists. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Matt Cuff, a senior policy advisor in the advocacy office of the Jesuits of Canada in the United States. He shares the social justice concerns of the Society of Jesus with elected officials and government agencies. Matt's particular issues or areas of focus are criminal justice, economic justice, and racial justice issues. Joining us from Chicago is Julian Medrano, who is the public policy director at Interfaith Worker Justice. Julian is a licensed attorney and has spent his career fighting on behalf of workers both internationally and within the U.S. Joining us from Rochester, New York is Lisa Davis. Lisa is a home health aide and vice president for the Rochester Workers Center there in Rochester, New York. As a part of the Work Center, she has spoken with hundreds of home health care workers, the media, as well as politicians. She is a mother of two very energetic girls, and Lisa is with Luis Torres, who is a lead organizer with the Rochester Workers Center. And also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Yaya Badji, who is an immigrant from Senegal and is a federal contract worker who has worked at Union Station, Washington, D.C., and works now with Good Jobs Nation, an organization that advocates on behalf of low-wage federal contract workers. Yaya worked in Senegal as a middle school teacher and moved to the U.S. to seek the American dream. And so we're here to talk about important economic justice issues, including especially the minimum wage. And so Julian, welcome. Thank you for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the minimum wage and the current situation of wages here in the United States?
Sure, absolutely. I'll start by just talking very briefly about Interfaith Worker Justice and what we do.
Great.
So Interfaith Worker Justice is a national organization that has over 60 affiliates across the country. And it's broken down into two kind of types of organizations. Half of them are faith and labor organizations and coalitions, and the other half are worker centers. And worker centers are places that individuals can go to work together, to organize, and to build power in order to improve working conditions at their organizations. And IWJ is now going on their 21st anniversary of being an organization, and the minimum wage has been a topic that we have been working on the entire time that we've been in existence. And so I'll just now start briefly talk a little bit about the history of the minimum wage and kind of where it stands today. So like all other things, incredible social changes that happened throughout United States history, this didn't happen overnight, right? There was a lot of failed attempts to make the minimum wage happen. And it takes, like many things initially with the New Deal, a catalyst to make it actually happen. And that catalyst in this situation was, like the catalyst for many decisions, the Great Depression here in the United States. And so the bill first became with the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. And the original minimum wage was 25 cents an hour at that point in time. And as you know, inflation continues to change the amount of spending power that each individual dollar has. And unfortunately, the minimum wage standard of that federal minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. And not only inflation, but the median wage of individuals and productivity within the economy itself. And so the last increase actually happened in July 2009, which brought the minimum wage up to $7.25 an hour. It's these wages that we look at now. They are poverty level wages. If you are if you're working 35 to 40 hours a week on $7.25 an hour, you are falling below the poverty line. There's just no way that an individual, especially if you have dependent children, it's just not possible to be able to survive on that level of income. And somebody working 40 hours a week should be able to make, at least be able to make a living and support a family. When individuals that are working full-time shouldn't have to rely on Medicaid. They shouldn't have to rely on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, as it's known to many people. And even just looking at the National Low Income Housing Coalition report, it stated that, as you can see on the graphic here, for a two-bedroom national housing that's moderate, it would take $21.21 an hour in order to afford that level of housing. And that's just a moderate two-bedroom house to be able to, or two-bedroom apartment or house to be able to raise a family. And that's not spending, more than your 30% of your income on your housing, specifically. So that's kind of where the minimum wage is currently, and there's a lot of people that can speak better on the issue of exactly living day to day on how these type of wages affect their lives. And luckily, we have a few individuals here with us today. So
that's right, Julian. So let's do that. Let's make that transition. I'd like to turn things over now to Yaya and Lisa, who've both been directly impacted by this issue. Currently, the U.S. government is America's #1 low-wage job creator, funding over 2 million jobs. It creates situations where people work in poverty or live in poverty, and a lot of this comes through contracts with private corporations. Many of these workers earn so little they have to use public programs like food stamps and Medicaid to meet their basic needs. Now, Good Jobs Nation workers have gone on strike over 20 times to call on the president and Congress to support the Fight for $15 and a union movement. As we said earlier, Yaya is a leader with Good Jobs Nation. Yaya, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your situation here since you came to the United States?
My name is Yaya Badji, and I'm an immigrant, a permanent resident from Senegal. Back home, I got my degree. I worked as a middle school teacher. I live in my family because I want to come and live. But the truth is, when I came here, I really realized that the American dream is a nightmare. The truth is also that the only jobs that I could find was the lowest jobs. I work in food services in a federal property. I was mistreated, overworked. I was dishes, clean tables. I also made sandwiches for only 10-25 cents per hour. It's at the time like a race. I have to pick up to look for a second job. I work 60 hours per week, but still I cannot afford to pay my rent and my other bills.
What about going to school, Yaya? Were you, in terms of your education and furthering that, were you able to do that with the wages that you were earning?
I even couldn't go back to school. How can I go to school with this? Because I cannot afford, like, where I'm living. I live by myself. So I have to do all those stuff first before I think about going to school. I cannot go to school because I'm gaining like a minimum wage.
Sure. Yeah. Could you? So we have people all across the United States who are watching, from different communities across the country, who are trying to understand the situation that you're in. Is there a message that you'd like to share with people, especially in the context of your faith?
Because as a Muslim, I believe that no matter what religion you believe in, we all must come together to fight for a better way. Because I cannot imagine living in the wealthiest country around the globe and having this minimum. So no matter what religion you believe in, I'm calling for everybody around the country to come together and fight for the minimum wage. And it's important to have 15 an hour so that workers like me can live a decent life. I was there when the Raise the Wage Act was introduced in the Capitol. And I call everybody in America to support this act.
Thanks, Yaya. I think that's a great message that you can share from your Muslim faith, and I think we can find a common, regardless of our faith tradition, we can find a common language in the idea of hoping that our brother and sister can be treated how we would want to be treated ourselves. And so when we think about the role of work in our life, how important it is, and how work with dignity that allows us to meet our needs, I think we can all appreciate the message that you share as a Muslim. Thank you. Let's hop up to Rochester, New York. Lisa, tell us a little bit about yourself. You mentioned you have, or I mentioned in your bio that you have young children. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Lisa Davis. I'm the Vice President of Rochester Worker Center for 2017. I've worked in the healthcare field since 2004. It's a job that I have a passion for, and I love it, but the pay is not great. There's such a high demand for home health aid workers and personal care aides, and the need is out there. And that's the job field that I went into, but I feel that we are underpaid. And I think that the minimum wage should be raised to $15, not just for the workers of fast food, but for everyone. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. Can you tell us a little bit more about, tell us about your work. How do you, my sense is that the work that you do is very important for people in your community who are trying to sustain their way of life in their home. Can you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yes, I used to work 84 hours a week. That was my permanent hours, 84 hours a week. I have two very energetic 6-year-old twins. I have 6 kids in all, and the workload is very heavy. To make ends meet, I have to work those 84 plus hours a week. And then I was wrongly terminated, and which I'm fighting for now. And when that happened, like, everything went downhill. Currently, I'm employed, doing the same thing. I work overnights, I drive during the day, and I also work weekends. My caseload is heavy, but in order for me to provide for my kids and my family and be an asset to the community, I have to work those hours. There's no decreasing, because I have to be able to pay my way in society. And it's hard, but I have to do it.
Sure. Lisa, can you talk, so, we're talking about the minimum wage, we're talking about the fight for 15. Can you talk about how a higher minimum wage would impact your life, would improve your life and that of your children as well?
Well, if the minimum wage went up, first of all, I'll be able to spend more time with my kids, and I'll be able to monitor my kids, especially when you have a community where you need to know where your kids are and what your kids are doing. I'll be able to provide better care for my clients, because I won't be so burned out. So I'll be ready and fresh, to give the best care possible. There's a lot of things. I can give back more to the community. I can volunteer more. I don't have to rely on any type of assistance from social services or anything, because I'll be able to provide my own transportation, pay for my own health care, things of that nature.
Lisa, can you, I'm a parent. I have twins as well. So as I was sharing before we went on the air, and I I find it challenging to meet the needs of my my children in the midst of a busy work schedule. But you work a significant amount of hours outside of your home. How do you deal with that with your children?
Well, it weighs on me pretty heavy at times, but I deal with it best I can. I try to, find support from my older kids, from family, but that's why I put so many hours in. I try to, work while they're asleep, work while they're in school, put them in some type of activity where I can work while they're there. You just have to do what you have to do. But it'd definitely be easier if the minimum wage was a little higher than it is now, which is rise for 15. Sure.
It's so important. Absolutely. Let's jump to Washington, D.C. again and talk with Matt Cuff and get a perspective from the Catholic faith. Matt, certainly our Catholic faith is grounded in a concern for people's ability to sustain family life as a core element of their dignity, but there are other elements of dignity that the Catholic Church teaches us about. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So first and foremost, the reason the Church cares about this issue so deeply is that it's precisely because of Lisa and Yaya and the many people like them. So I want to thank them for sharing their stories. I think their stories contextualize for us how important this issue is. They reveal to us that current wages are too low. They prevent workers from meeting their basic needs. And more than that, it also prevents them from contributing all the amazing qualities that they have fully to the community because they're so caught up in just trying to make it. This is an issue that's as old as the Bible. So concerns about wages appear throughout both books, the Old Testament and the New Testament. You see references made in Deuteronomy, Book of James, all of those kind of references. But I want to focus more on what the Catholic Church and its social teaching has said specifically about these issues. So the Church has spoken at length about some of these issues. So really beginning in 1891 with Pope Leo XIII, he wrote an encyclical, that's just a church document on social justice issues, called Rerum Novarum. It was focused on the condition of labor. So he wrote this in response to the turmoil of the 1890s, the Industrial Revolution. This document really pioneered the notion of a living wage and how everyone has a right to earn a wage that is going to allow them to live with dignity and participate fully in the community. But it also talks about the role that government needs to play in talking about these issues. So subsequent popes, bishops, and councils, and all types of theologians have kind of spoken about this issue. Though the historical contexts in which all of these kind of writings and ideas appear are different, there are two constants that you'll find in all of the Church's statements on these issues. First, that low wages and worker insecurity are a feature of the economy even today. And second, the Church always arrives at this judgment from direct contact with people who are suffering from these injustices. So we always are listening to stories. So it's not just this high-minded kind of rhetoric. It's listening and engaging with, it's trying to be in solidarity with people who are struggling with these wages. So there are kind of three really quick principles I wanted to pull out that I think are all interrelated that the Church uses to think through this issue. So first, the idea of the dignity of work. So Pope Francis said not too long ago, this is a quote from the Pope, work, to use a metaphor, anoints us with dignity. It fills us with dignity, makes us similar to God, who has worked and still works, who is always acting. It gives one the ability to maintain oneself, one's family, and to contribute to the growth of one's own nation and community. So what Pope Francis is really saying is that while our dignity comes from God, there's a way in which work allows us to kind of work with God to build a fuller community. And that's something that John Paul II has also talked about. And so the idea that work itself is a dignified kind of act. But the flip side of that is, the situations in which we work, the wages we receive, and the way we're treated need to also reflect our own dignity. So it's a both and kind of relationship. So the second kind of principle I'd like to pull out is the right to a living wage, or simply the idea that, work exists for the person, not the person for work. There's a long tradition of highlighting the notion that we should be able to provide for ourselves and for our families through the wages we earn. So at Vatican II, Second Vatican Council, bishops of the world said wages should guarantee the opportunity to provide a dignified livelihood for oneself and one's family on the material, social, cultural, and spiritual level. The bishops in the United States made a similar point. They said a living wage is not necessarily the full measure of justice. They said that the living wage is simply the minimum of justice. So what that means for the church and for the world is that something like the minimum wage is the baseline, the building block of a just economic community. And then finally, the third point that I want to make, and I think that both Yaya and Lisa really, really demonstrated this, is that we have a right to participate in community, and the current wage structure is really limiting that right. So, wages and the dignity of work are about more than just ourselves and our families. They're about our ability to contribute to the common good of the entire community. So, the U.S. bishops and Catholic Charities USA, when the last minimum wage bill was introduced, had a statement that said, just wages allow us to develop more fully as individuals, as families, neighborhoods, communities, churches, and even society as a whole. The current federal minimum wage falls short of that standard. And so, and the last point I want to make is that why does the church support the government taking action in this space, as opposed to just leaving it to individual employers or states? And I'll point to John the 23rd, who said the whole reason for being for the government is to realize the common good. It can't stand back from economic matters. It has the duty to protect the rights of all of its people, and particularly its weaker members, be they workers, women, children, or immigrants. It can never be right for the state to not engage in this kind of work. So really, it's kind of a really baseline issue for the church.
Thanks, Matt. That was really helpful insights into the teachings of the church on this. Now let's jump to Congress. Let's transition to Congress and back to the legislation. As you mentioned, or we mentioned earlier, this legislation for the minimum wage was introduced in a new minimum wage bill. So Matt and Julian, can you tell us a little bit more about the bill? Matt, maybe you could talk about how it was introduced, the type of legislation, and what it would have, what impact it would have kind of on the minimum wage. And then Julian, maybe you can offer some insights into how it would impact different types of workers.
Sure. So the minimum wage, it's called the Fair Minimum Wage, or Raise the Wage Act, was introduced on May 25th. And it was introduced in both the House and the Senate, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. In the Senate, it was introduced by Senator Sanders and Senator Murray, and they have 30 other senators who are supporting it. And in the House, you have Keith Ellison and Bobby Scott, who are the main supporters of it. And you have over 170 members of the House of Representatives who've registered their support for it. So what this bill does, it's called the Raise the Wage Act, and it does that. It would raise the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour by 2024. So it's a slow progression to $15 an hour over those years. So you'll see it phased in over time, so that it's not going to kind of shock the economy or businesses. It'll give businesses time to adjust, and it will get us to that level of $15.
And Julian, what about for like someone who works in a restaurant, a tipped worker, or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a couple other things that the Raise the Wage Act does itself. And one of those things is to get rid of the tipped minimum wage. Many people have worked service jobs where they got paid based on tips. And the federal, right now, minimum wage for tipped workers is nowhere near even close to the $7.25. It's $2.13 an hour. $2.13 an hour. And so there was a study done around the wage an hour, the Department of Labor wage an hour analysis of the cases they've done. And in all of the cases they've investigated in the restaurant industry, 80% of them found wage theft within the restaurant industry as well. So not only are they not making, oftentimes not making that minimum wage, they're making that the $7.25 an hour, they're making $2.13 an hour. And that's just unacceptable. I think everyone can agree that is just not a moral thing to do. And in restaurants where, it's often times very difficult to track what you're getting paid in tips. It's a cash industry, for instance. It would just do away with all of that specifically, right? So that would be the tip minimum wage would just be completely phased out under the Raise the Wage Act. And I think we can all agree that that's really important and would really help people get paid what they're owed in those industries, and hopefully a living wage that lasts. And going to that, one thing I spoke about earlier is how there's a constant fight, and it regularly happens, about raising the minimum wage. Okay, so the last time wage was 2009, where and now we're fighting again to try to incrementally raise that wage. Well, what this bill would do is it would actually peg the minimum wage itself with the median wage of the country at this point in time. So as the median wage of the country begins to increase, the minimum wage will be pegged to that number. So this fight wouldn't be happening consistently every few years to try to fight to get the raise and have the same arguments back and forth. It would just continue to be pegged to that median income. So, this fight would not be necessary in that way. It would also do away with the two other sub-minimum wages, which are companies being able to pay individuals with disabilities, a sub-minimum wage. Oftentimes there's hundreds of thousands of individuals with disabilities working in this country right now that earn an average of just over $2 an hour. And this minimum wage bill would do away with that.
Thanks, Julian. And let's talk about this, across the country. Who would benefit from this bill? How many people would benefit from this legislation throughout the United States?
Sure. Reports from the Economic Policy Institute, as well as other organizations, have shown that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024 would lift the wages of over 41 million American workers. That's 30% of the American workforce would be benefited by this bill being passed.
Wow, that's a significant number of people. And think of all the stories, the people connected to those, their families, their children, like we heard from Lisa, that goes even farther than that 41 million, I would imagine.
Yeah, and Chris, I'd just like to note too that this is especially impactful for particular kinds of communities. So over 55% of women in the workforce will receive some sort of increase because of the minimum wage. 40% of African Americans in the workforce and 33% of Hispanic workers in the workforce will receive wage increases because of this legislation. And stunningly, children, I think, will probably benefit the most. So nearly 1/4 of all children in the country today live in households that would benefit from this increase. So 1 out of every 4 of our kids will benefit from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And studies have shown that, for every 10% increase in the minimum wage, the poverty rate is expected to decline by 5.3%. So it affects just a massive amount of the U.S. population, working population. Right? And as Matt said, not only working population, but children as well. And the federal minimum wage of 15 by 2024 would raise the wages of parents of 19 million children across the United States. That's nearly 24% of all U.S. children would be impacted because their parents are impacted by the raise of this wage, by raising the wage by 2024.
Now, Julian and Matt, when Congress looks at the minimum wage legislation, and they've done this before, bills like this have been introduced, we will hear a lot of different viewpoints, competing viewpoints on this issue. Can you help us sort out some of those perspectives, some that may be myths, some that may be more based on fact? Can you help us understand some of the different ideas that are out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one myth that is consistently heard over and over again is that this is going to just kill jobs. It's going to destroy the economy. And businesses just will not be able to afford a $15 or a minimum wage, right? And that is the exact same argument that they made when they were trying to pass the initial minimum wage in 1938 to when they're trying to actually get the incremental increases in the minimum wage now. I mean, the studies have shown that where the wages are being increased, it has not, where the minimum wages are being increased, it has not destroyed the economies in any way. The economies in those different areas and within the United States as a whole have been able to adjust to a new minimum wage and a higher minimum wage. There hasn't ever been a study where a municipality or somebody increased the minimum wage and it drastically, in any meaningful way, changed the job market in that area, negatively so. And additionally, I think that the second biggest myth that you always see is that individuals who work minimum wage jobs are teenagers, right? They're people just entering the job market. They're 15, 16 years old, and they're getting into, this is their first job, right? I mean, we've all been there. We worked, I worked minimum wage jobs when I was just starting out. Absolutely. And those people are definitely part of the individuals that earn a minimum wage and work minimum wage jobs. A lot of people think that they live with their parents, they work part-time after school, and this is just kind of extra spending money. But quite frankly, that's just not the reality. The average minimum wage worker is 35 years old. 88% of them are not teenagers and are over the age of 20. 36% are 40 or older. And as Matt was mentioning, the majority are women. 56% of them are women, and 28% of them have children. And it's just staggering how different the minimum wage worker is described and is often stereotyped to be, when in reality, that's just not the case.
And Matt, thanks, Julian. Those are great. Those are some of the things that were on my mind that I've heard people talk about. Another one, Matt, is that when we raise the minimum wage, we're going to be shipping all our jobs to other countries like China or Mexico, Central America, things like that.
Sure. So this is one we hear a lot. It's related to that first point Julian brought up about this being a job killer. But what that kind of talking point fails to recognize is that our economy has fundamentally changed over the years, and we are not living in that kind of sort of industrialized, making cars and manufacturing kind of economy anymore. Those jobs still exist, but those are not minimum wage jobs anyways. They're going to be paid much higher. What has happened to our economy, we're seeing more and more jobs popping up in the service sector. Actually, since the Great Recession ended after the 2008 financial crisis, the majority of the jobs that the economy has regained are all in the service sector, all low wage kind of earning jobs. And so, what we're really going to be doing is improving that workforce. Those jobs are not going to go elsewhere.
And Matt, the other one would be that this is a state issue. States should figure this out in a more local way.
Sure. So, I hear this from a lot of members of Congress. I even hear this from a number of Catholic members of Congress who point to an idea in Catholic social teaching, the principle of subsidiarity, which says that you should try and figure things out at a local level first, and then only come up to the high, like the federal or the state level if necessary. But what I say to that is, I think that's a little bit of a misreading of what the church kind of says. A great theologian, Megan Clark, talks about how subsidiarity ought to be read as do something at the lowest level possible, but at the highest level necessary. And so we've not been seeing some of the localities and states that desperately need increases, that have some of the highest poverty rates, actually taking this on. And so I think that really calls on the federal government to engage in this. So, for instance, just a few weeks ago, in Missouri, St. Louis passed a minimum wage increase, and then the Missouri state legislature passed a law that would prohibit cities and municipalities from raising the minimum wage. So essentially, you had a state telling a city, you can't raise your wage. Same thing happened in Alabama last year. And so I think this really demonstrates the need for the federal government to kind of get involved here.
Thanks, Matt. Those are helpful. We just have a couple minutes left here, but I wanted to give Lisa and Yaya one more chance to share any other thoughts about this issue as we come to a close. Let's go back to Rochester, New York, and to Lisa. Lisa, is there anything else you'd like to share? Any message you'd like to share with those watching today about the need for a higher minimum wage?
Well, I think we do need it, not only for me, but for all of Rochester. Being that Rochester is one of the poorest cities in the nation, I mean, it really could do us some good, because a lot of the experience I'm experiencing, a lot of other people are facing the same thing, and so I am the vice president of a worker center that, can bring people together so we can fight for what we want, fight for what we need.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. And let's go back to Washington, D.C. And Yaya, any closing thoughts for our viewers on the importance of raising the wage?
Like what I want to add is, today, if, for example, they increase the minimum wage, people like me can go back to school, educate myself, and also think about the education of my kids. In the future, I would like to have a family, to have a family and, live a decent life. And also those people, if you see a lot of people like are relying on the Medicaid or food stamp, and how much like it's costing like for the government for those people. So today, if they raise the minimum wage to 15, it's good for the economy of this country. It's going to be good for like the poor people like me, handling to how can I make it every day. I want to educate myself. Educate myself is being part of like the society of the ongoing construction of this country.
Excellent. Thank you, Yaya. And Julian, final thoughts from where you sit at Interfaith Worker Justice.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's right in our name too. Interfaith, right? This is something that a living wage, working with dignity. This spans all religions and all religious denominations, right? Whether you're Buddhist or Muslim, Christian, it doesn't make a difference. These are principles and moral issues that every religion speaks about and is behind, right? And I just think it's very important as a society that we live by the values that we preach. And as this minimum wage bill, the chances of it getting passed right now are not 100% likely in any way. To be honest, it's not likely that this bill is going to pass, but I think it's very important that we tell our congressmen that we support raising the minimum wage, right? That's the only way we increase knowledge and energy around getting something like this passed, right? So, I recommend that everybody that's watching this, please, reach out to your congressman. We're going to send a link out. I'll just say it now, but it'll be linked to the bottom as well. It's bit.ly.com, BITLY.com/raise the wage 2017. And so we'll link to it as well, but that will allow you to connect with your congressman. If they have already signed on to the bill, or senators as well, if they've already signed on to the bill, fantastic. Let them know they're doing a great job. If they haven't signed on yet, let them know that you want them to sign on to the Raise the Wage Act.
Great. Thank you, Julian. And let's go to Matt Cuff at the Jesuit Conference in Washington, D.C. for any closing thoughts, particularly as we think about engaging Congress in this dialogue on the importance of raising the wage for the dignity of workers.
Sure. So this is one of those issues in which it can get a little partisan. People kind of retreat to their corners. And opposition to the minimum wage is really about, I think, more of an ideology and a belief system rather than it is about realities. So Pope Francis is really famous for always repeating the line, realities are more important than ideas. And so what are the realities we're talking about? we always need to remember that the realities we're talking about in this issue are, Yaya and Lisa. It's their lives. It's the lives of the people that they work with. Those are the stories that we need to inform the policy debate.
Great. Well, thank you again. We're about out of time, but I want to say thank you again to Yaya, who joined us there from Washington, D.C., and for the work of Good Jobs Nation, to Lisa, as well as to Luis for joining us from Rochester, New York, and for the good work of Rochester's Workers Center. To Julian at Interfaith Worker Justice, thank you so much for being with us and helping to bring this group, wonderful group, together, and to Matt Cuff at the Jesuit Conference. We're grateful for the partnership of each of you in lifting up the story of workers in low-wage situations, for highlighting the need for policies that illuminate the dignity of all of us, in particular when it comes to work. And again, thanks to maybe a second thanks to Lisa and Yaya, just for sharing your stories so personally and offering us a perspective on what this issue means to people most affected by it.